Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I would like to say, before this video begins, that I just got off a 24-hour flight. 24 hours. So if you think I look rough as hell right now, respectfully, keep it to yourself. And also, in the same vein, if you think I look the same as always, also keep that to yourself, because that would be violently humbling if this is as good as it gets for me, you know? There's nothing worse than when you're having a bad hair day and you're like, oh God, I look awful, and someone's like, you just look the same as you always look. Oh, so you think I always look bad? You think I'm a minger? You think I'm a sewage rat? Thank you so much for that. Now my day is ruined. So anyway, what is the video? This is my most requested video, maybe ever, because over the years, I've tried many different ways of finding unique book recommendations. And the one main thing that I have not yet tried that is sticking out like a pork chop at a vegan festival is reading books based on my MBTI personality type. The Myers-Briggs... This is a terrible time to realize I don't know what the T and the I stand for. Myers-Briggs type indicator. Huh, I learned something new today. I did not know that. I've actually never done the quiz before. This is the very first time I did the quiz because, being honest with you, I just had a bit of free time. I was waiting for my flight and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do the Myers-Briggs test. So, personality type reveal. I'm an ENFP. What does that mean? I don't know. Woo! Personality type reveal. Turns out I'm annoying. Who'd have guessed? I didn't need a personality quiz to tell me that, but now it's in writing. This made me very curious, so I posted on my Instagram story. If you're not following me on Instagram, respectfully, what the hell are you doing? You are missing out, it's an absolute hoot over there. But anyways, I asked you guys, what personality type do you predict that I am? And while a lot of people did get it right, an equal number of people guessed INFP, which is introvert instead of extrovert. And it did make me kind of spin out for a second, because I was like, the perception of me that people have on the internet might actually be different to who I really am. It is actually crazy how obviously you guys only see me on my YouTube channel when I'm like at home in my library reading books. So maybe a lot of people do assume that I'm an introvert, but I do think I lean more towards extrovert. Like in social settings, definitely 100% extrovert. The reason I've never taken the quiz before is because I don't think it's as dichotomous as introvert versus extrovert, because I think it's contextual and it's also one really fuels the other. So I can be very extroverted, but at the same time, I also need to like disappear for a little bit and be by myself for a while. I love doing things on my own. So for me, well, I'm also a Libra, and being a Libra is all about balance. So that is kind of a guiding principle for me too. I don't even really subscribe to any of this, but I'm thinking, wait, maybe it is all written in the stars. Maybe I have never had an original thought ever. Anyways, I do think I've always found like I need a real balance between moments of introversion and moments of extroversion. So I don't know if it is kind of a binary of one or the other, because, you know, I mean, I've just spent a month solo traveling Korea by myself, you know, doing everything entirely alone and having lots of time to think and be creative by myself. But at the same time, I'll also host like a Halloween party and a New Year's Eve party that had 200 people at each, you know? So I don't know, I guess I contain multitudes. I don't know, and I think that's the reason I've resisted the Myers-Briggs personality quiz for so long, but it did say in my results that I'm a weak extrovert, which I actually thought was kind of embarrassing, because weak extrovert is like, oh, you're an extrovert, but you're not even that good at it. Like, you're an extrovert, but you're still insecure. Nice one, you know? That feels like a double-edged sword. So anyway, riddle me that one, MBTI. I don't understand. Anyway, moving on. The second letter is sensing versus intuition, but because we've already used the letter I for introvert, it's S or N, not to be mistaken for S and M, which is very different. That's a whole different kettle of fish. The easiest way to think about this apparently is practical versus creative. So I definitely fall into the creative category. So for that, I am N for intuition. Next is thinking versus feeling. And I'm a big fat F. F in the chat for Jack Edwards. One thing about me, I'm going to feel. I'm gonna look at my shelf of poetry. You think that I'm thinking about things? I'm just feeling them. Like smooth brain, head empty. That one, I could have guessed a mile off. I'm a lover boy. Through and through, to my heart, to the core of my being, I am a lover boy. Anyway, the final letter is judging, so J, versus perceiving, P. Judges appreciate structure and order. Order! They like things planned and dislike last-minute changes. Perceivers, on the other hand, appreciate flexibility and spontaneity. They like to leave things open so that they can change their minds. And it's true, every day I wake up and choose chaos. I very much don't organize my life via Google Calendar. I organize my life via vibes. My schedule is a suggestion for me, and I kind of improvise from there. I think it's tough because there are things that I am very organized with. Like I said with introvert versus extrovert, I don't think it is a dichotomy. I do think that you can be somewhere in between. It's more of a spectrum, but I definitely lean more towards P than J. Anyway, ENFPs are campaigners, whatever that means. Well, I'll tell you what that means because I have it right in front of me. ENFP personalities carry an interesting blend of carefree sociability, sparkling imagination, and deep contemplative introspection. They regularly use their natural curiosity and expansive creativity to try to better understand themselves and the complex dynamics of human relationships. That's actually really funny because that's what I love to read about. I love reading about the human condition, so that kind of checks out. And they are truly devoted to nurturing their relationships with and their understanding of the world at large. In their unique way, ENFP's introspective nature is driven by their imagination, wonder, and belief in things that cannot always be explained rationally. Myers-Briggs said, "You are irrational. You are a problem," and we are now going to explain why. People with this personality type truly believe that everything and everyone is connected, and they live for the glimmers of insight that they can gain from these connections. They believe that how we treat one another really matters. In fact, ENFPs are the most likely personality type to believe in the concept of karma. ENFPs say stream Karma by Jojo Siwa. ENFPs really said karma is the breeze on the weekend. Karma's a relaxing thought. Aren't you envious that for you it's not? ENFP featuring Ice Spice, bitch. I did my research and I found the top books that are recommended for ENFPs. My ENFP pool, if you will, that's the fandom name. The ENF people are reading these books, or should love these 3 books. So I bought them, and in this video I am going to be reading them. And the first one is a Vonnegut book. A fellow ENFP, this is Cat's Cradle. I've read one of his books before. In fact, you know what the interesting common denominator is that I've read one book by each of these writers before and enjoyed them. And it was actually hard to find 3 books in the list of books recommended for ENFPs that I hadn't already read, which is, I will say, kind of crazy. Like, it was blowing my mind a little bit. That is Crazy featuring Beyonce. So I do actually think these could be pretty accurate. So anyway, we have Cat's Cradle, we have A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki, and we also have And Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. So I'm gonna be reading these books. I'll give you a review of each of them when I'm finished. And basically, you can just use me as your guinea pig, because if I like the books that are recommended for my personality type, then it probably means that you will like the books recommended for yours, which of course may not be these 3 particular books, but if you are an ENFP, if you are one of my ENFP poll, then you're in luck because I'm going to review these ones, and I did all the research for you. But I basically searched on Goodreads, on YouTube, on Google, and I found really interesting lists of recommendations. So these are the 3 books that I'm going to read that were recommended for me based on my Myers-Briggs personality type. Let's go. So the first ENFP book that I read was this one. This is And Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. And let me start by saying some of the poems in this collection are so beautiful that I wanted to just curl up in a little ball and scream, because they're that good. Like, this felt so nourishing and cleansing to read. And I say this about a lot of my favorite writers like James Baldwin and Toni Morrison. I think Maya Angelou is kind of in that region of writers who just got the human condition and wrote about it so empathetically and beautifully and in a way that feels universal, maybe. And because of that, it's still just as pertinent and powerful to read today. I mean, I love reading poetry. I think reading poetry is good for the soul. And before I continue with this specific review, I did also want to touch on something else that I think has been very, very good for my soul recently, because this year has been tough. I found this year very, very difficult, but I feel like I'm kind of dusting myself off a little bit. And that thing has been therapy and starting my journey with therapy. And really and truly, therapy has made all of the difference, specifically online therapy. And that is why I'm so excited to let you know that this video is in paid partnership with BetterHelp. And BetterHelp allows you to access therapists online. And the reason I'm such a big advocate for online therapy is because for me personally, you know, I travel around so much, it's hard to kind of pin myself down to one specific location. And if that gets in the way of doing really important work for myself, that's an issue. Being able to remove that barrier and do it online has been crucial. When you sign up to BetterHelp, you'll complete a survey so you can explain the specific needs and requirements that you have, and they will match you with a credentialed therapist. And it's really important to find someone who you feel safe and comfortable talking to. And when you go to their site, you can actually use my code betterhelp.com/Edwards from the comfort of your own home, and you will get a special discount on your first month. BetterHelp will match you up with a credentialed therapist, usually within about 48 hours. Have that first conversation and see what it can do for you, and whether having that safe space to discuss actually will change your life for the better, to help yourself be the best version of you that you can be. That's definitely been my experience. I feel much better and I have better coping mechanisms. So head to betterhelp.com/Edwards for that special discount, and thank you BetterHelp for working with me. So back to these poems. These poems are lyrical and powerful, but also playful, with themes of yearning and loving, dreaming, but also disappointments, you know, the inevitability of disappointments in life. There's also a kind of motif that is a bit of a theme throughout her work, which is the caged bird singing for freedom, which speaks to Maya Angelou's preoccupation with discussing really important themes like racial injustice and gender-based injustice. Maya Angelou was such an inspiring person. I read that she'd actually received 30 honorary degrees already by the time this book came out. Like, that is how revered she is and was. And I'm glad that she got her flowers during her lifetime too. You know, I'm glad that this isn't someone we look back retrospectively and say, oh, wasn't she great? I'm glad that in her lifetime people recognised how brilliant her work was and how people did celebrate her advocacy for important causes. In this collection, my personal favourites were the poem Prescience, Where We Belong, a duet, A Kind of Love, Some Say, Is It True the Ribs Can Tell, The Kick of a Beast from a Lover's Fist, The Bruised Bones Recorded Well, The Sudden Shock, The Hard Impact, Then Swollen Lids, Sorry Eyes Spoke Not, of Lost Romance, but hurt. Hate often is confused. Its limits are in zones beyond itself, and sadist will not learn that love by nature exacts a pain unequaled on the rack. So good. I love the poem Remembrance, Refusal, Just for a Time. Oh, this one is so good. It's called The Lesson. I started to underline this and then ended up just underlining the entire thing because I loved it so much. So the poem is called The Lesson. I keep on dying again. Veins collapse, opening like the small fists of sleeping children. Memory of old tombs, rotting flesh, and worms do not convince me against the challenge. The years and cold defeat live deep in lines along my face. They dull my eyes, yet I keep on dying because I love to live. I like that idea of being, you know, past your prime and continuing anyway because living is just so wonderful. The idea of your defeats and difficult times being marked in lines on your face kind of as a sign of resilience. And I think resilience is a real theme in this book and in her writing as a whole. And that's kind of where the collection gets its title from. There's a poem called Still I Rise. And I won't read the whole thing, but I will read these lines because I think they are so important. Because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room, just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. It feels like an incantation, like a chant even, to keep persevering and keep going. She's so inspiring. Maya Angelou is just the GOAT. You know, she used to rent out a hotel room in her local area and she would just go and work there, you know, instead of working from home to get a new environment, to get a creative space specifically. She would go to a rented hotel room. She wouldn't sleep there, she'd just go there for the day. R.I.P. Maya Angelou, you would have loved WeWork. I will say one thing, and I feel like I should form a barrier around myself and hide when I say this, but the only reason that this isn't a complete 5-star read for me is because there are a few poems in here, a few too many poems in here that use rhyming structures that I felt were a little forced, maybe, you know, like the rhyming couplets. It sometimes, very occasionally, sometimes feels like the line is there for the rhyme as opposed to the other way around, like the rhyme is leading what the line is saying. Maybe that's just personal preference, but I really, with poems, feel like you don't need to have to rhyme. And I know the poem I read before, I said it feels like a chant, it feels really empowering because of the way it's written with those rhymes, but sometimes in here, in a couple of the poems, they do feel a little clunky because it feels like the rhyme is being forced. But that is a minority, I'm just saying that's the reason this isn't like 100% 5 stars for me. But will I continue to read and buy every Maya Angelou book? Yes, I will. However, this is the trouble with authors like Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, like some of my favourite writers aren't around anymore to produce new work, and so there is a finite amount of their work that exists. And that, to me, is devastating. And so I'm kind of drip feeding their work to myself. Like I have to ration it out so that I don't read it all at once. I have to save some of it so that I have some left to read. Isn't that sad? I just have to make sure that I still have new work by these authors for a long time, you know, and I'm running out. This is the problem. There isn't gonna be any more. So I am taking my time with this work before it runs out completely. But for now, that is Maya Angelou's poetry, and still I rise. And rise she did, all the way to the top. Maya Angelou is untouchable, so I like that a lot. The next book recommended for ENFPs that I read, I was kind of nervous about, I'm not gonna lie. That book I've just finished. It is Ruth Ozeki's A Tale for the Time Being. And listen, the reason I was nervous about reading this one is because I've read 2 other Ruth Ozeki books, and neither of them for me were like, smash the ball out of the park, fantastic. I really liked Time Code of a Face, and then I read the Book of Form and Emptiness because it won the Women's Prize, and it just didn't land for me. I liked it, I liked Ruth Ozeki's style, I just didn't really enjoy that book. I felt like it was way too long. I felt like there were more deserving winners of that year's Women's Prize. There were some really excellent other books that it was up against. And so I went into reading this one with some reservations because I was like, which way is it gonna go? And actually, I think this is my new favorite of Ruth Ozeki's work. So this was a huge win. I've been waiting for the Ruth Ozeki book that I think is great and I want to recommend to everyone, and I think it might be this one. Because this, oh, chef's kiss. And actually, weirdly, I now remember that I've had so many comments over the years on my videos from people saying, you should read A Tale for the Time Being, I think you'll really like that book. And it has taken me all of this time to get around to reading it. It's described on the cover as a triumph by the Sunday Times and Luminous by Madeline Miller, and I have to say, I agree. So I will be raving about this for the time being, and for some time in the foreseeable future as well. A Tale for the Time Being is set in the wake of the 2011 earthquake and tsunami which hit Japan. And a lady on the other side of the ocean in British Columbia is at her beach house when a Hello Kitty lunchbox washes up on the beach. And she finds it, she opens it, and inside of the lunchbox is a diary. Now, this character's name is Ruth. This is confusing because the author's name is also Ruth, and I do feel that the character is deliberately named the same as the author because she acts as a kind of stand-in for the author. This is a real character study, and I think it's testament to Ruth Ozeki's own interest in character and in trying to get inside someone else's head. And we get inside both of these characters' heads because the diary inside the lunchbox belongs to a young girl, a young schoolgirl called Nao. In that diary, Nao has been observing the world and speaking about her heartbreaks and her hopes and her dreams, and Ruth is kind of a researcher, and so she begins to sort of research this girl and read about her thoughts. Nao is a bit of a misfit because she is originally Japanese, but her family moved to Silicon Valley, and so she grew up in California but then has moved back to Japan. And so it's this really interesting situation where, you know, her Japanese isn't great, she feels a lot more confident in English, and so her classmates see her as a kind of foreigner. Although of course when she was in California she was also perceived as a foreigner. So she is kind of existing between these two identities, never fully being able to assimilate into either. Like I said, she's treated unkindly at this school. We find out through the course of reading through her diary, which Ruth takes kind of step by step, stage by stage. You know, she's slow at reading it, and so we're kind of drip fed that story. We find out that Nao has been through some truly horrific things and is struggling really severely. All this girl wants though is for someone to understand her, and so Ruth is working, like I said, slowly through the diary in order to do that, in order to empathize with this person who poured their heart into the diary. And the characters do at times mirror each other. Ruth herself is Japanese American, so they both experience the diaspora even though they're coming at it from different angles, and they also do have a lot of differences, fundamental differences. Of course, Nao is a high schooler, and so Ruth is trying to understand the sentiments of a teenager who is sometimes histrionic and melodramatic, but ultimately just wants to feel seen. And Ruth kind of grants her that, even though they don't know each other and they don't meet. So we're switching between their two perspectives, Ruth and Nao. Nao's father at one point had attempted suicide, and she has this constant anxiety about him and how he's doing and his mental health. I don't want to give away too many spoilers of what happens in the book, but it becomes quite genre bending, era bending, and really plays with the concept of time by employing magic and fantastical elements. And Ruth ends up learning a lot about her own life through viewing life from the lens of someone else. You know, someone who's a different age to her, someone who is on the other side of the earth to her, and the ways that we understand and connect with each other. And my favorite character, I have to say, is this 105-year-old anarchist feminist nun. She's aware of a time. I think it's really fun the way that Ruth Ozeki plays with time, you know, throughout her work to explore the fundamentals of human nature. And it's not high fantasy, but the light fantasy elements bring out the humanity in these characters even more. It's also an example of Schrodinger's cat, in a way. I don't know if you know the theory of like Schrodinger's cat, but I'll try my best to explain it. It's kind of this theory that if you have a box, and inside the box is a cat and something that could kill the cat, then there is a moment when you cannot see into the box where you do not know if the cat is dead or alive. And there is every possibility that it could be either of those two things, because it's completely up to chance. And so the concept of Schrodinger's cat is where there are two completely plausible conclusions, situations that could have occurred, but you currently don't know which one has happened. And so you're kind of in this state of flux where both are kind of true and both are also kind of not true at the same time, because neither is confirmed, but you have to prepare yourself for both eventualities. And I do think that Ruth's experience with Now is kind of this Schrodinger's cat experience, because she kind of exists as both. She could be dead, she could be alive. Ruth doesn't know, and now calls herself a time being. So this was multifaceted, experimental. It really got me thinking. You definitely have to work for it. It is pretty dense, but I think that it was worth it, honestly. So I found my Ruth Ozeki book that I really enjoyed, and I, for one, am buzzing about that. A win for the ENFPs today. So when I was researching ENFPs at the beginning of the video, I actually started to look into which celebrities have the same personality type as me, and honestly, it was extremely humbling. Rather than explain, let me just show you. This is a clip I actually cut from the beginning of the video, but I think that I want to show you. So whatever, roll the tape. Oh, I wonder who the famous people are who are ENFP. Oh, Ellen DeGeneres? Ellen? What are you doing here? We have Ricky Gervais, Russell Brand, Charles Dickens. Wait, I want to redo, not my op, not my number one enemy, Charles Dickens. Okay, this is the ENFP redemption arc. We also do have Drew Barrymore. Like, we will crawl on the floor and invade your personal space, but like, we'll do it in a loving way. We'll do it in a way where it doesn't feel uncomfortable. I don't know why I did that. We have Daniel Radcliffe, we have Jennifer Aniston, we have Bob Dylan, we have Jim Carrey. Actually, my two favorite movies are The Truman Show and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, so I hate to say it, they might have a point. We have Gwen Stefani. I've been acting like sour milk all on the floors. Your body didn't shut the refrigerator. Maybe that's the reason I've been acting so cold. And we have Kurt Vonnegut, which is an extremely helpful segue. First one is a Kurt Vonnegut book. So yeah, definitely a mixed bag, but the best in the bunch for me was Kurt Vonnegut. The fact that Kurt Vonnegut was also an ENFP is excellent news, and is the reason that I picked up this book, Cat's Cradle. Kurt Vonnegut was a kind of counterculture writer. He was known for his satirical writing, his dark humor, and maybe his most famous book is Slaughterhouse-Five. It's basically this book about his experience as a prisoner of war in the Second World War, and he really is the master of the allegory. In Slaughterhouse-Five, he uses an allegory of being abducted by aliens to explain his experience of being a prisoner of war. And ultimately, I think it's because it was too painful for him to recount the actual events. And his character in the book becomes so desensitized to suffering and conflict and the tragedies of war that he starts to just say, so it goes, every time he is confronted by death. And Cat's Cradle was actually published 6 years earlier in 1963, and it's also extremely allegorical. This one is a satire on the Cold War and published at such an interesting time in American history. So this was published in 1963, and in 1962 we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that's a really important historical backdrop for the novel. And you have to remember that everyone reading this book in 1963 would have just experienced the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was basically a standoff standoff between the US and the Soviet Union, where, to cut a long story short, the world was essentially on the brink of nuclear war, like a complete ideological clash between two of the world's mega powers, where it became a very real possibility that it could end up in the total destruction of both countries, if not the world. So that is the backdrop for this book, Cat's Cradle. Now, the book is kind of morbidly funny in the way that it discusses the arms race and scientific and technological advancements that were happening in the world at the time, and a lot of those advancements could destroy us. So this is a little meta, but in the book we are following a writer who is hoping to write a book called The Day the World Ended, which is about when the atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. It imagines what people might have been doing when the atomic bomb went off. And so, as part of his research, he decides to interview the children of the man who invented the atomic bomb. This is a fictional man, a fictional character, clearly based on real people, but this is slightly different. Like, this is not Oppenheimer Part 2. And one of the kids of the creator of the atomic bomb says that the man who created the atomic bomb was playing Cat's Cradle, which is like a string game between your fingers, when the bomb was dropped. So it's kind of this idea of like nonchalance again, this idea of having a nihilistic attitude about the meaningless of life when this technological thing that he has quite literally invented is killing thousands of people. And in the face of extreme tragedy and suffering, he is just playing a string game. So again, this book is concerned with the idea of how war dehumanizes people. Now on this trip, the writer also learns about a substance called Ice-9, which the inventor of the atomic bomb was also experimenting with at the time. And Ice-9 is this substance where they changed the molecular structure of water, so Ice-9 could freeze over all of the water in the earth, basically could freeze over anything that it touches. And so at first it touches a corpse, but then anything that corpse touches will freeze over as well. And so if Ice-9 were to touch the ocean, the entire ocean around the entire world would freeze over, and therefore it would be essentially the end of the world. So it's kind of another weapon of mass destruction in a way, a weapon that could end the entire world, just like atomic bombs could also. And so ultimately Cat's Cradle is a book that is concerned with man's relationship with technology and the dangers of the technological advancements of the day, because science was being used to destroy people in the same way that the Cold War could have totally destroyed humanity as a whole, using technology that humans created. And during the Cold War, in a way, proving that countries had the power to destroy the world became more important than the fact that these countries should be protecting the humans and the societies who live in the whole world. So it's about how power and technological advancements became more important than people. And this book explores the same thing. It also extensively explores religion and free will, and I found it genuinely captivating. It's entertaining, but also electrifying. I think that J.G. Ballard, who was also a kind of speculative fiction writer, once said about Vonnegut that he looked the world straight in the eye and never flinched. And I think that is so true. That sums it up perfectly. This book is short, but intense. It's kind of broken up into these very, very tiny short chapters. And I liked it. Honestly, all three of these books that were recommended for ENFPs have been bangers. These have been crowd pleasers. I mean, the crowd is literally just me. And you now, so welcome. You're in on this too. You're in it with me. So I genuinely would say, look up your Myers-Briggs personality type if you don't know already, do the quiz, and find some book recommendations for your personality type, because actually I really enjoyed all of these. And while I may not have thought all of them were like completely 100% perfect, I did really enjoy the reading experience, and I think that's what you can really ask for. So yeah, these three books were really fantastic. It turns out I do recommend this as a viable way of finding great books that you may want to read. So if you are looking for a book to read this summer, this could be the way to do it. So thank you for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Make sure you follow me over on Instagram, on TikTok for more content from me, my second channel. You can subscribe here if you haven't already. If you haven't already, respectfully, what are you doing? I mean, you're your own person, you can decide, but if you made it to this point in the video, you might as well subscribe, right? So thank you for watching. All the best, stay in touch, have a wonderful day, and I will catch you very soon. Bye-bye.